In Job chapter number 3, remember that there was a day where all of his fortune and all of his livestock and everything and all of his family, all of his children were all taken away from him. They were all killed. And then Satan came back for round 2 last week in chapter 2, and he is now covered from the top of his head to the bottom of his foot in boils. He's in agony. He is suffering physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, spiritually, more than any other man has ever suffered other than Jesus Christ, you could argue. And remember also that he was the greatest man on the earth at this point. And then his 3 friends came from, again, that region right there in Edom, and they're all sitting with him for 7 days. Nobody's speaking. And now in chapter 3, Job breaks the silence. After 7 days, he begins to speak, and we hear his agony. And I just want to point out, before we start reading all this, that this is the best man on the earth. And if the best man on the earth can get to the point where he longs for death, don't you think that it can't happen to you? You say, well, I'm saved. This was a better man than you and me. And he got to this point. And do you look down on Job? No, I don't. And you shouldn't look down on others if they get to a place like this either. They need help. They need to be ministered to. So I'm going to just call this chapter Job's depression. All right, look at verse number 1. After this, after all those events, opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. Now remember that the accusation that Satan had made to God was that he would curse God to his face. And he doesn't. He does not curse God, at least not directly. Instead, what he's doing is he is cursing the day that he was born. Look at verse 2. Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there was a man-child conceived. And we talked about that already last week. There's a prophetic reference there with that word man-child. It ties to the nation of Israel, ties to Jesus Christ in the Great Tribulation period. But just focusing on the practical here, the birth of a baby is a great day. Great day. And yet he's basically saying, what's the point of all that if it's going to end up like this? The grief of my present condition is greater than the joy of my birth. Look at verse 4. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Now, he's doing 2 things. Devotionally and historically, he's lamenting the day of his birth, but prophetically, he is describing this great tribulation and the second coming of Christ. When it says right there, let that day, prophetically, whenever you see a reference to that day, what day are we looking at? Say it, Linda. The day of the Lord, right? The prophesied day of the Lord, which includes the tribulation, all right? And as we saw back when we studied Matthew, and as we saw earlier in the book of Acts, Peter was preaching about the day of darkness when the sun and the moon and the stars all went dark and didn't give their light. And of course, that didn't happen in history. They're talking about what's going to happen in the tribulation. You see it in Joel chapter 2, Joel chapter 3. You saw it in Revelation chapter 6 and chapter 16. It was one of the judgments of the great tribulation before the second coming. That's what he says here in verse 5 too. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. So again, practically speaking, just getting a glimpse into Job's mindset, he just sees darkness and death closing in on him from every side. And it's possible that maybe, now again, Satan was not allowed to kill him, but it's possible that he's got infections from these boils and that his life is being drained from him. He wanted to die at the minimum. And that phrase, the shadow of death, will appear 10 times in the book of Job. That phrase, the shadow of death, is prophetically connected to the tribulation, where you could run some references in Isaiah 9 and Psalm 44 and Psalm 23, and you could deduce the possibility that there is maybe an atomic explosion of some kind, and it creates that mushroom cloud, and there's all that nuclear fallout. And in that location that you just watched that video of, God is keeping them safe, literally underneath the shadow of death, literally. But, in Psalm 22, 23, and 24, you're getting the first, second, and I almost said the first, second, third coming of Christ, but the first and second coming of Christ prophetically. In chapter 2, Jesus Christ is being described through the crucifixion in Psalm 22. Excuse me. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? It's all there. He's describing the crucifixion in detail. Psalm 23 is the one that everybody knows from funerals. Yea, though walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, and all of that. Well, after the first coming, Israel has to go through the tribulation, and that's them in the tribulation. And then what happens at the end of the tribulation? Pastor Schwader just preached about it Sunday night. The King of Glory returns in Psalm 24. It's all laid out there. So the shadow of death practically has meaning, but prophetically it's the tribulation period, always. All right, look at verse 6. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. In other words, there's nothing to rejoice about with me. Don't try to cheer me up. There's nothing you can do. That's basically what he's saying there. Verse 8, let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. All right? So Job is in mourning. He is mourning the loss of his children while he is physically suffering. And this too prefigures and is a type of Israel in the tribulation period. You might just go with me to Matthew quickly. Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mountain. It was over a year ago. We were in Matthew chapter 5 down in the basement and teaching on this verse right here. But in Matthew chapter 5, he is laying out the conditions of Israel in the tribulation period, awaiting the coming kingdom. And look what it says in verse number 4. Blessed are they that what? Mourn. Who's mourning, waiting for the kingdom? Israel. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. When are they going to be comforted? When the king comes and brings in the kingdom and saves them from the Antichrist. Look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 30. And just for the sake of context, look at verse 29. Okay? Verse 29 gives you the context. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. That's what we just covered in the preceding verses, right? Now look at verse 30. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. All right, so this mourning, it's tied to, if you go to the book before Matthew, is Malachi, and just before that is Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. This is one of the famous prophecies of the second coming of Christ. Zechariah 12:10. And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications, and they shall look upon me, whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him. Did you catch the me there? Who's speaking in Zechariah 12:10? God the Father, speaking through his prophet. But did he say they'll mourn for him, or did he say they'll mourn for me? First person. So who was Jesus then? He's God, right? That's God the Father saying they'll look on me whom they've pierced. They pierced Jesus. Jesus is God. You get it? Simple logic. All right, let's go back to Job chapter 3. All right, so again, I mean, Job is such a practical book, but it's so rich in prophetic material. This corresponds so much with what the prophets, Matthew, Revelation, everything. All right, verse 9. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. And we know that's literal in the tribulation. And let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. The dawning of the day is the second coming of Christ. Malachi 4:2, Joel 2:10, Mark 13:25. You want death. You see what I'm saying? You talk about a man who's depressed and is down. He doesn't even want to be saved. He wants to die. Don't even try to save me. It's a waste of energy. That's what he's saying. Verse 10. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Watch this. You hear the pain in his voice when you read this. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? That's a man who is as depressed as you could possibly be. Not only is he wishing for death, longing for death, he's lamenting that he was ever born in the first place. He wished that he died. He's basically saying that he wishes he died in childbirth. He wishes he was born a stillborn. And in Revelation chapter 9, verse number 6, men are going to feel this way. They are going to long for death, and it's going to be taken from them. All right, Revelation chapter 9, verse number 6, it says, "In those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." That's what Job's experiencing. So again, he's a prophetic picture of all this stuff. All right. He also says, "Why the breast that I should suck?" He's basically saying, I was a waste of my mother's nourishment when she nursed me. Jeremiah got to a place, not quite this bad, but similar in Jeremiah chapter 20, verse number 15. He's also writing about the tribulation period. Now in verses 13 through 19, Job stays in this dark place, and he's going to make some comments here about death. But he's making these comments as a man who does not have a Bible and does not know what you and I know. So some of the things that he's saying, we know to not be correct from revelation that we get later on in Scripture. Even the Old Testament Jews, they really did not have much to go on in the Old Testament about the afterlife. There's nothing really, there's not much in there about that, because they were looking forward to a revived kingdom with their king on the earth. And that's what they're going to get. But they didn't really know much about heaven and hell the way we do, because it's revealed in the New Testament. So just keep that in mind when he's not making doctrinal statements about the grave. All right, and again, this is a man who's hurting. Look at verses 13 through 15. "For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then had I been at rest." In other words, this is a man who thinks death is going to be better for him. "With kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver." Basically, what he's talking about here is he's talking about death as kind of being the great equalizer. It gets all men, rich or poor, everybody goes to a place where they're at peace. And he was longing for death. Now look, if you've never been to the place that Job is, praise God for it. Praise God for it. But as we sit here tonight, there are thousands of people all around this country that are thinking those very same thoughts this very moment, and are contemplating ending it, thinking that, oh, well, it'll all be better when I get to the other side. But they don't really, they're like Job, they're speaking without revelation. They don't know the truth. They don't know what's waiting for them on the other side in a Christless eternity. All right, now look at verse 16. "Or as in hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light." So when does an infant see light for the first time? When he's born. The first 9 months or so is in complete darkness. And so again, he's lamenting the fact that he was born at all. He wishes he was stillborn or even miscarried. Verse 17, "There the wicked cease from troubling," again in the grave, "and there the weary be at rest." He's again just convincing himself that death is going to be better, and that he'll get some rest from the pain and the suffering of this wicked, cruel world. And let me just say this. This is exactly what the devil wants a depressed mind to think. That's the goal. The whole goal here was to take one of God's men and bring him down and get him to abandon his faith and basically go to hell with him, right? This is what the devil wants. Look at verse 18. "And there the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and the great are there, and the servant is free from his master." Again, the equality of death. There won't be oppressors and oppressed anymore. There won't be racial differences. There won't be religious differences. There won't be economic differences. There won't be social differences, a master and a servant. None of those things will exist. Equality. Well, it's, if I can make a practical point about that, in Christ, that's true. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. All are welcome to come to him. All are welcome. He's no respecter of persons, as we'll see in Acts chapter 10. All right, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter soul. This is a question that starts in verse 20 and ends in verse 22, but I'm going to read this again. But this is going to be the first of one of about 20 deep philosophical questions that are posed in the book of Job. And it boils down to why do the righteous suffer? Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery? Well, what's the point of even being born if you're just going to suffer as severely as I'm suffering? Why have life in a bitter soul, which long for death, but it cometh not? And I already showed you Revelation 9:6 for the typology. And dig for it more than for hid treasures. In other words, I want death more than someone who's digging for gold wants gold out of a mine. That's what he's saying. Which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. He's basically just saying, why doesn't the Lord just let the light go out so I can go home? Why is he keeping me alive just to suffer? That's the idea. And I'm just going to say this. As a Christian, you want to be able to minister to people. This is giving us a master class on how to minister to people that are brokenhearted, mourning and grieving and depressed. This is giving you some insight into the thought process. The instinct, particularly for a Christian, is, and it's not wrong, it's a part of the formula, but it's not the whole of the formula, is to tell someone when they're really down and out and suffering is, well, you just got to get in the Bible and you got to pray. Is there anything wrong with that advice? Nope. Is it true? Yep. But is it a cure-all in every case? No, it's not. I know two preachers, two pastors in the eastern United States that I respect tremendously and have suffered with severe depression. And it changed, listening to them speak about it candidly and vulnerably, changed some of my perceptions about it over the last few years. And one of those preachers, and I'm just going to, again, reads his Bible and prays more than me and anybody else I know, and still feels the way that he feels sometimes. He said this about his depression. He said, quote, if Ed McMahon rang my doorbell with a check for $15 million, I'd say thank you, then close the door and go back inside. You'd say $15 million, that'd make me smile. That would solve a lot of my problems. That would make me feel a lot better. And it would mean absolutely nothing to him. You got to realize this. It is natural, normal, and right to feel bad when things are bad. You know, if you got some things going on in your life that are bad, you lose your job, you lose a loved one, you got some infirmity or someone you love is dealing with some kind of struggling, you're going to feel bad, and you should, and that is normal. True depression is when you still feel that way when everything is good and right around you. It's not attributable to any sort of bad way, right? And there's a spectrum there. Don't get me wrong. But another of the preachers that I know that struggles with this says this: depression occurs when everything in my life is right, and you just still feel awful, and you don't really know why, and you don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, Job is, not only is he here, he's kind of beyond here. We got to be careful about how we minister to some stuff, and we're going to take some lessons from chapter 4 and chapter 5, not tonight, but we're going to see, remember we saw, well, let's finish this chapter and we'll get into it. Why is light given to a man whose way is hid, verse 23, and whom God hath hedged in? When he says, why is light given to me? That's the light of life that he's talking about there. He's saying, why should I live when I'm surrounded by suffering and I can't move forward? See how it says that he was hedged in? This is not the same hedge that Satan talked about. He went to God and said, Job, you've put a hedge of protection around him. You've put a barrier of protection to keep evil out. But this is the opposite of that. This is Job feeling like now he's hedged in with the evil and cannot escape it. There's nowhere to go. A hedge of thorns is a phrase that the Bible uses in Proverbs 15:19 and 22:5. That's what I would say he's describing right there. And by the way, that's exactly what hell is going to be like. Those people would do anything they could to get out of there, but they're hedged in and they cannot escape from it. Remember that man that we read about in Luke chapter 16 some months ago? Man, that guy was suffering. He said he was in agony in that flame. He called out to Lazarus and said, Lazarus, just dip some water in my tongue. And give me some relief. That man in hell, those men in hell, women in hell, they want two things. They want relief, and they can't get it because they're hedged in. And the other thing they want is for somebody to go and warn their brethren. Go and tell my brothers, Father Abraham, send someone, warn my brethren, lest they come to this cursed place. We ought to act on that part of it. Verse 24, for my sighing cometh before I eat. My roarings are poured out like waters. He has no appetite. Again, maybe because of physical pain, maybe because of emotional pain, but he can't eat. And he says, my roarings are poured out. His grief is just so heavy that he's just roaring loudly. And roarings, like it says right there in the verse, often associated with waters. And for those of us that were just at Niagara Falls a couple weeks ago, when you go up to those falls, you're walking up there, I mean, you can hear that water roaring over those cliffs from a pretty good distance away. And it's just an ever-present noise. It's powerful. And that's what he's saying here. And by the way, this is a type of Jesus Christ right here. Look at Psalm 22. Psalms is the book right after Job. And I just referenced this a little bit ago. Psalm 22 is talking about Christ on the cross 1,000 years before it takes place. And look at 22:1. Psalm 22:1. We're talking about the roaring here. And he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why are thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Look at Psalm 32, verse 3. Psalm 32, verse number 3. When I kept silence, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the day long. It's crying, agony, loud lamenting. All right, 3:25. For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. Now that's insightful, and it becomes important in chapter 4 when Eliphaz starts calling him out on some things. Remember that there was 4 definitive statements that God made to Satan concerning Job, and one of them is that he feared God. Now, we also know that in Job's behavior in chapter 1, that he was so afraid that if his children had some unconfessed sin and bad things should happen to them, what did it cause him to do on their behalf? He made sacrifices for them every day. You're getting some insight into what Job's philosophies were, all right? That he feared God, and maybe that is why he made sacrifices for his children. He was afraid something bad would happen if they didn't do right. Now, he may also have had some sort of premonition or bad feeling that something could happen, but I think the first thing I said is maybe more true. All right, and we'll see more of that in chapter 4. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. In other words, I wasn't just sitting around being lazy. I wasn't just staying home in safety and trying to ignore others and not face the things in the world. I was trying to live right, but trouble came anyway. Why? So again, just take some advice from this. Job was a man who lived right, did right. God led him into this trial. And just as it is for you and me, and we've covered this in 2 Corinthians in parallel to this, ironically, is that sometimes you're going to be doing right, you're going to have some kind of revival, some spiritual breakthroughs, and then the devil's going to come back and punch you in the mouth. It's just the way it's going to be. Right? The devil's going to strike back. He's going to try to give you some kind of trouble. He's against you doing right. He doesn't want you to do right. And he's going to do everything he can to appeal to your flesh to get you to stop doing right. Book it. It's going to happen. So what do? Don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. But he's going to try to discourage you after revival, after a victory, after a spiritual mountaintop. He's going to try to get you down that valley again. You got to do everything you can to stay close to the Lord and keep persevering forward. Don't let him make you quit. That's what the devil wants. He wants you to quit. He wanted Job to quit. He wanted Job to quit by killing himself. He would take that from you too. But he'll settle for you just stop reading your Bible, stop coming to church, stop witnessing, and stop living for God. That's a win too. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about depression and suicide. I know we're running out of time, so we probably won't get into chapter 4 tonight. But 16 million people, 16 million Americans struggle with clinical depression. Depression is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness or a loss of interest, sometimes is accompanied by anxiety, and in severe cases, it leads to suicide. The United States had 49,300 suicides in 2024. It's one of the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States, especially amongst young people. I think it's like number 8. The greatest man on the earth in these days was suicidal. And he's not the only one in the Bible. Look at Numbers chapter 11. Numbers chapter 11. Say, Pastor, why in the world are you talking about this? Because you have no idea what goes on in people's lives. That's why. And I don't know what goes on in people's lives. But I know this. I don't want anybody in my church, and I don't want any Christians that I know, and I don't want anybody in your life to get to that point where they don't feel like they have anything else they could do other than just punch out. So we're going to talk about this. So Numbers chapter 11, was Moses a great man of God? Is he a hero of the faith? Look at Numbers chapter 11. Pick it up in verse 10. Then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. Moses also was displeased. And Moses said unto the Lord, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of all this people upon me? Does that sound familiar? Like, not exactly the same things that Job was saying. But he's like, Job, God, what are you doing to me? Why are you putting me through this? Have I conceived all these people? These are not even my children, God, they're yours. What do I got to deal with this for? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldest say unto me, Carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth a sucking child unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? When should I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, Give us flesh, that we may eat. I am not able to bear all these people alone. It's too heavy for me. Look at verse 15. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me. Kill me, I pray thee, out of hand. If I have found favor in thy sight, let me not see my wretchedness. God, if you love me, take me home. It's pretty rough, isn't it? They're not the only ones. Go to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19. Was Elijah a good man of God? Was he a hero of the faith? Aren't Moses and Elijah's ministries still to come? They're not even done yet. God's not even done with these guys yet. He's bringing them back in the tribulation period for 42 months of ministry. 1 Kings chapter 19. This is after the great revival, the spiritual high that took place at the end of chapter 18 when he killed all the prophets of Baal and God answered and took the sacrifice by fire. One of the high water marks of Israel's history in the Old Testament. Well, chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and with all how he'd slain all the prophets with the word, or the sword, excuse me. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah saying, So let the gods do to me and also more, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by the morrow about this time. And when he saw that he arose and went for his life and came to Beersheba. Look at verse 4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die. Said, It's enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, he had no expectation of waking up and living another day. But something happened there. Keep reading. Behold, then an angel touched him, and said unto him, Arise and eat. Now, who's the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament? And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and he laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time, touched him, said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. Now, here's the thing, devotionally speaking. When he was at the end and didn't think he could go on, he needed Jesus. And Jesus came to him. And Jesus gave him water and gave him food. One of the things that we'll see Job say later in the book is, I have esteemed the words of thy mouth more than my necessary food. And man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And so that little cake cooking on the fire and that little cruse of water right there pictures the Bible. And so the very first place we should go for spiritual strength and comfort when we're in that state, right here in the pages of that book that God's given to you. Because you need Jesus. You need to be in his fellowship. You need to be in his care. Now listen, Moses, Job, Elijah, great men, they did not kill themselves, but there are other men in the Bible that did. All right, we're not going to go through all of them, but Samson did. King Saul did. Ahithophel does. Judas does. I mean, they did. And one thing that I think all Christians that are here tonight, again, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think I can assume this, we would all want to be able to know how to minister to somebody that's in that state, right? And it's not easy to do. So I'm just going to give you some practical helps from one of the aforementioned preachers whose name I'm not going to give you, but a man that I greatly respect and has more experience on this topic than anybody I know. All right, I'm going to give you 10 things. And some of them might even surprise you a little bit. But first things, the spiritual things. Read the Bible and pray. All right, read the Bible and pray. Be faithful to church. You'd say, oh, Pastor, you're supposed to say that. We pay you. No, that's not why. Listen, you need fellowship. One of the temptations when you're in this mindset is to retreat inwardly into solitude. You need people. You need fellowship. And I know it's going to be very, very hard to walk in the back door when good-meaning people that don't know maybe what's going on in your heart and in your mind are going to ask you, how you doing? You doing good today? And you're just going to say, yeah, I'm doing good today, when you're really not. But push through it anyway. Push through it anyway. All right? You need fellowship, and also on a very practical perspective, you need to get out of the house. You got to get out, and you got to be around God's people. All right? Number 2, communicate with people. Like, you don't want sometimes maybe when you're in this state to talk, and you don't want to be able to let anybody know what you're dealing with, but you need to. You need to be able to be heard. You need to be able to communicate with people. All right? I know this is going to be hard to hear. You may always struggle with this. Right? If it's truly like some kind of an organic thing, like I said, and it's not necessarily tied to circumstances that can change and can improve, it may be something that's going to be besetting, and maybe the Lord will deliver you from it, but maybe it won't. But even if it doesn't, you have to have hope and understand that it can improve, and you can get some victories along the way. And as I kind of said at the end of a sermon recently, I don't remember which one it was, but if you know to do something and you did it, immediately do the next thing that you know to do, and you got win, and then you got another win. And I love the phrase, just start stacking small wins, because they add up and they can make a huge difference. All right? But most importantly, number 4, never lose hope. Christians have a blessed hope in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. So we should never lose hope. You have a great physician who knows how to treat your soul, knows how to treat your mind, knows how to treat your body. And so when we're ministering to people that feel like there's no hope, we should always use the scriptures to remind them and to show them, because God said so, that there is always hope. Always hope. All right, number 5. And this might get into some secular things here a little bit, but in some cases, something like cognitive therapy might be a good thing. What does that mean? A retraining of your mind. Now, scripturally speaking, this is scriptural. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 5. Let's go there. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Depressed feelings come from your mind, right? So you have to take control of those things and don't let them run wild. Are you allowed to let lustful thoughts run wild in your imagination? Are you allowed to let covetous thoughts run wild in your imaginations? Are you allowed to let angry thoughts run wild in your imaginations? Then you shouldn't let depressive thoughts run wild in your imaginations either. They're just as destructive to you. All right, so look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 5, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. That's a great verse, and you got to memorize it, and you got to use it. It's key to spiritual warfare, which, by the way, is also the context of the verse. If you look at the preceding verse, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, they're not physical, but they're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Depression is a stronghold. It's a fortified thing in your heart and your mind that you're going to have to conquer and fight against with God's help. And his word is key to doing it. Another practical thing, get some exercise. Get some exercise. A good walk, maybe a run, get out in the sun, like physical movement, get a sweat going. Like those things can have a great an impact on your mental health as well. Proper diet and nutrition. Sometimes depressive feelings comes from vitamin deficiencies, like vitamin D, like in the wintertime when there's no sun. This is science. Like God made you this way, right? Take some vitamin D supplements and get proper nutrition, eat better, cut some sugar out of your life. If you smoke and drink and all that other kind of stuff, there's scriptural reasons to get that stuff out of your life too. But there's also medical and nutritional reasons to get that junk out of your life as well. You should see all the secular science that's coming out on alcohol right now. People always used to say, oh, it's bad for your liver, but it's good for everything else. No, it turns out it's an actual poison that's killing your brain. There's a ton of literature that's coming out in the last 18 months on this. It's incredible. It's been in the Bible since the beginning, right? I think I kind of touched on this one again, but I'm going to reiterate it. Resist the temptation to seclude yourself from others. You need fellowship. Push yourself to get up and get moving. There's going to be, again, and this is in somebody's words, there's going to be good days where you can get out and you can do stuff. And there's going to be bad days where it doesn't matter what happens, you're not doing anything. But it's the in-between days where you got to push yourself to get out and to get moving and to get in the Bible, to get into a conversation, all right? Christian counseling is another good thing. I think that's a good idea with the right counselor, a pastor or somebody that's trained maybe on the medical side as well as the Christian side and can use scriptures. And there are some pretty good counseling services that I could recommend if you needed one. And then in the most severe cases, and I'm not advocating this, but it might be necessary in some cases, you might need a medication. Now, there has been a 400% proliferation of the use of antidepressants in this country. 80% of the people that still use them regularly still report being depressed. So I'm saying this with the understanding that I'm not saying it with the expectation that it's a cure-all or that it's appropriate for every situation. If your feelings are tied to some calamity or some sort of something that will pass in time, probably not the appropriate thing. But if you have an organic need for something like that, then I'd wade into it carefully, but it's something that probably should be considered in certain cases. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if you go to bed every single night and you're in excruciating, agonizing pain, like Job was, that there might not be a medical solution that would have given him some relief. And I'm not going to sit there and tell him, well, you just got to memorize more Bible verses. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, there is a place for medicine, people. And there's an abuse of it that can take place, but there's a use of it that can take place. And that's just something that you should consider if it's something that's really warranted. All right, so I'm going to stop there because we're kind of running out of time. But I just want you to see, again, scripturally speaking, that even the strongest believers can get to a dark place, a really dark place. And unfortunately for him, insult is about to be added to injury. And in chapter 4 and chapter 5, the silence is going to be broken now by people that turn out to be miserable comforters. And there is a lot for us to learn from chapter 4 and chapter 5. We're going to hit both chapters next week. And at the end of it, I'm going to draw out some conclusions about how someone, well-meaning, who has the right book, has the right answers from scriptures, can say the right thing and still be wrong. And that's what we're going to learn next week. So please come back for that. It'll help you.